So Jeff, I wanted to ask you, how long have you been coming to
On
this
and off
conference?
for about the 12 years.
For about the total 12 years. And I was curious, what have you seen change in the nature of the conversation, the nature of the people coming to the conference over those 12 years?
Number one, sharp reduction in investors. You see it in the managed money levels, the number of hedge funds, the amount of real money in commodities. It's dropped precipitously, which is pretty consistent with the attendance. You look at the oil panel just now. It had more representative of the industry than a hedge fund. I think Pierre was the only hedge fund manager up there. So right. I think it's a very different setup from that perspective. The other thing too is the greening of it. In terms of you listen to many of the questions, they're focused much more on more of the green as opposed to the dirty commodities, and then which should be expected, with energy transition. And then I would argue that the third one is there's a much greater focus on metals. And I think that's because of, green metals, green CapEx, so it's kind of tied to the second one.
Right. And that brings me to the second question. I think thought leader is an overused phrase, but you are definitely the thought leader in the commodity space. And I know you were on a keynote address this morning, keynote interview. Coming in here, what were the actionable ideas that you wanted to bring to the conference, that you wanted people to take away?
I think first and foremost is to understand what drives a commodity super cycle. Dave, you and I go back into the 2000s and thinking about commodity cycles, but now, having sat in the seat for 27 years, I have a much greater perspective. And it just really boils down to the need for physical capital. It's physical capital to grow oil supply, physical capital to grow copper supply. What happened over the last decade, we've now seen this 3 times. You and I were the ones who coined the term the revenge of the old economy. It just put bluntly is the returns are better in the new economy than the old economy, and capital was redirected to the new economy, choking off the investment that would have otherwise grown the supply base. There is the core of the problem. Well, but what I've really picked up, particularly in the last 6 months, is the 2010s were identical to the 1990s, which were identical to the 1960s, all characterized by low and stable inflation, lower interest rates, and investors chasing long-duration, new economy tech-type instruments, leaving the old economy starved of the capital that needed to grow the supply base, and you're pushed into these environments with higher commodity prices and the need to make investments. And so in other words, a commodity super cycle is a CapEx cycle. And when we think about what are the higher interest rates telling you to do, put money to work in the economy today. And it's just fairly simple. So a lot of people are questioning whether or not we're in a super cycle or not. No, I mean, the higher interest rates are telling you, invest in this stuff. I like to point out, Fed rate hikes, they may cure the symptom, which is inflation, but they don't cure the underlying illness, which is underinvestment.
Yeah, and it really ties into your first comment about investors not being at the conference. Where's the money going to come from?
It's going to come out of the new economy. NASDAQ's up. So, I think the key is what's going to create that redirection of capital. And when you and I were doing this in 02, 03, in that time period, what it ultimately took was really bad returns in the new economy. And by 04, 05, we saw that rotation. And I think that's ultimately what's going to have to happen here, because right now they're making more money being in NASDAQ than they are being in old economy.
Yeah. Any ideas you've heard, any kindred spirits or, new ideas for yourself that you're taking away from the conference?
What I've taken away is a newfound respect for the difficulty in clean energy technology. Whether if it's the energy required to create the pressure for hydrogen, leading to a substantial deterioration in available energy, or the amount of metals needed in EVs. These are going to be very expensive, and I think that the message that I'm taking away and trying to reinforce is the cost of decarbonization is just going to be tremendously high. All of these technologies are very expensive.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you with that. So you've said this cycle, has a lot of similarities to the CapEx cycles of the 90s, of the 2000s. I think even went back to the 1960s and 70s. But of course, this time there's the whole green transition element to it. So if you look out at markets with your 27 years of experience and look at this cycle and what's potentially different about it, what do you think we need in terms of, new markets, new tools to manage this cycle and to manage the risks that are?
New risks create new opportunities, and I would argue that the focus here is on transition risk. It's something that investors have yet to harness. And whether it is this duration, and I was talking about on the panel, which is you get oil, it gives you cash flow today versus something green that doesn't give you cash flow for 10 years or something. And so bridging that gap is a new kind of risk that needs to be thought about. But also, in things like, whether if it was nickel, that Jeremy Weir was talking about, the fitness of current contracts. We're dealing with entirely new fundamentals, new commodities, and I think the contracts need to be thought about in terms of their appropriateness given the current environment. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for innovation and lots of opportunity for new ways of thinking about these markets.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.